For decades, the Murdaugh name carried power in South Carolina. But in the end, it wasn't power that saved Alex Murdaugh. It was evidence that brought him down. A phone recording, a kennel video, financial records, and a series of lies that investigators slowly began to unravel. By the time Alex Murdaugh walked into court for the murder of his wife Maggie and his son Paul, prosecutors had one enormous problem to solve. How do you prove that a man killed the two people closest to him when there was no murder weapon, no eyewitness, and no clear physical evidence directly connecting him to the killings? Their answer was simple. They didn't try to prove the entire case with one piece of evidence. They built the story piece by piece, and eventually, Alex's own words became part of the evidence against him. When the trial began, the prosecution presented a picture of a family whose life had been collapsing behind closed doors. Alex was facing enormous financial problems. His law firm was discovering missing money. Clients were accusing him of stealing. His personal finances were becoming increasingly desperate. And at the same time, he was dealing with the aftermath of Paul's involvement in the 2019 boat crash that killed Mallory Beach. The prosecution argued that Alex's financial situation gave him a powerful motive. But there was still one major question. Why would he kill Maggie and Paul? And more importantly, how could he have done it? The night of the murders, on June 7, 2021, Maggie and Paul were killed at the family's property. Paul was shot multiple times. Maggie was also shot. And for investigators, the crime scene raised more questions than answers. There was no obvious explanation for what had happened. Alex initially told investigators that he had discovered their bodies after returning home from visiting his sick mother. He presented himself as a devastated husband and father. But investigators eventually discovered something Alex couldn't explain away: a video recorded at the family's dog kennels. The kennel video became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. The video had been recorded on Paul's phone shortly before the murders. And in the background were the voices of Maggie and Paul. But investigators also determined that Alex's voice could be heard in the video. That was extremely important, because Alex had previously told investigators that he had not been at the kennels that night. Now there was evidence placing him there, and suddenly the timeline changed. Alex couldn't simply say he wasn't there. He had to explain why he had lied. The timeline starts to collapse. The prosecution argued that Alex had been with Maggie and Paul shortly before they were killed. Then, according to prosecutors, he left the kennels and went to visit his mother. When he returned, he claimed to have discovered their bodies. But investigators began examining the digital evidence from the family's phones. Paul's phone activity, Maggie's phone activity, Alex's phone, the movements of their vehicles, and the timing of calls and messages. The more investigators reconstructed the night, the more difficult it became for Alex's original story to survive. And eventually, Alex admitted something shocking. He had lied. He had lied to investigators about being at the kennels. But Alex said there was a reason. He claimed his addiction to painkillers had affected his thinking. He said he had become paranoid and believed investigators were trying to accuse him. But the prosecution saw it differently. They argued that Alex wasn't simply confused. They argued that he was lying because he had something to hide. Then the prosecution turned the courtroom's attention to money. And this part of the case revealed just how complicated Alex Murdaugh's life had become. Alex had been stealing money from clients and from his law firm. Millions of dollars had disappeared through fraudulent schemes. He had debts. He had financial pressure. And investigators discovered that his financial problems were becoming increasingly difficult to hide. The prosecution argued that Paul and Maggie were also connected to problems Alex desperately wanted to control. Paul's involvement in the boat crash had created enormous legal and financial pressure on the family, and Maggie was becoming increasingly concerned about Alex's financial situation. Prosecutors suggested that Alex believed killing them could temporarily stop his problems from catching up with him. But there was another twist: the roadside shooting. Just days after the murders, Alex was shot on the side of a road. At first, it appeared that he had been the victim of another violent attack. But investigators eventually discovered that this story was also connected to a lie. Alex admitted that he had arranged for another man to shoot him. Why? According to prosecutors, Alex wanted to die so that his surviving son, Buster, could receive a life insurance payout. It was another desperate attempt to solve his financial problems, and it changed how investigators viewed everything else Alex had told them. If he was capable of creating a fake assassination attempt, what else was he capable of lying about? The moment the case changed. During the trial, Alex eventually took the witness stand. It was an extraordinary moment, because for the first time, jurors were hearing directly from the man accused of killing his wife and son. Alex admitted stealing money. He admitted lying. He admitted his opioid addiction. And he admitted that he had been at the kennels that night, but he denied killing Maggie and Paul. Again and again, Alex insisted he did not murder his wife. He did not murder his son. But prosecutors attacked his credibility. They asked him about the lies. They asked about the financial crimes. They asked about the kennel video. And they asked why he had lied about being at the kennels. The defense argued that Alex was a deeply troubled man who had made terrible decisions, but that those decisions did not make him a murderer. The prosecution argued the opposite. They told jurors that the lies were not random. They were lies designed to hide what really happened. The verdict. After weeks of testimony, evidence, photographs, financial records, and arguments, the jury finally had to make a decision. Was Alex Murdaugh guilty of murdering his wife and son? The courtroom waited. And then the verdict came. Guilty. Guilty of murdering Maggie Murdaugh. Guilty of murdering Paul Murdaugh. The man who had once been one of the most powerful lawyers in his community was now a convicted murderer. And the following day, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Alex Murdaugh would spend the rest of his life in prison. But the story didn't end there. The murder convictions were only one part of Alex Murdaugh's downfall. His financial crimes eventually caught up with him too. He pleaded guilty to numerous federal financial crimes involving schemes to defraud clients, his law firm, and others. He was sentenced to decades in federal prison for those crimes. The same man who had spent years presenting himself as a successful attorney had become one of the most infamous criminals in the country. And the Murdaugh family name, once associated with enormous influence in South Carolina's Low Country, had become synonymous with scandal, fraud, and murder. What really happened that night? Even after the verdict, one question continues to haunt people who followed the case. Why? Why would a father kill his own son? Why would a husband kill his own wife? And what exactly was happening inside Alex Murdaugh's mind on June 7, 2021? The jury decided that the evidence proved Alex was responsible, but the case still leaves uncomfortable questions. Because the Murdaugh story wasn't simply about 2 murders. It was about a powerful family whose secrets remained hidden for years. It was about addiction, money, deception, fear, and a man who appeared to have everything while privately losing control of his life. Final moments. Maggie and Paul didn't get to see how the story ended. They didn't get to see Alex convicted. They didn't get to see the investigation uncover the financial crimes. And they didn't get to watch the powerful Murdaugh legacy collapse. But their deaths changed everything. The case exposed years of financial deception. It exposed a complicated web of lies. And ultimately, it brought one of South Carolina's most prominent families into the national spotlight. Alex Murdaugh went from respected attorney to accused murderer to convicted killer. And perhaps the most disturbing part of the entire story is how long the truth remained hidden in plain sight. Because sometimes, the biggest mystery isn't finding the evidence. It's realizing that the person telling you the story may be the person trying hardest to hide the truth. This is the story of Alex Murdaugh, and this time, the lies finally collapsed.